And welcome to the Anorak Review Show with your host, the Anorak. If my voice sounds a bit off today, I'm in the midst of having a bit of a typical runny cold and whatnot. But of course, as they always say, the show must go on. Let's talk about a man named Peter Gabriel. Many would know him as the original front lead singer of the classic prog rock band Genesis. And he has definitely left such an impact on that band. Albums such as Trespass, Nursery Crime, Foxtrot, Sell England by the Pound, and The Lambs Lies Down on Broadway wouldn't be the albums they are if it weren't for his songwriting and vocal talents. Of course, by the mid-70s, he chose to leave the group, who eventually chose their drummer Phil Collins to do the lead vocals, and he would go on to do his own musical work and kind of adapt his own diverse and world-inspired styles. And more often, however, his music is often seen as not exactly the most commercial, as opposed to Genesis, who have at around the same time decided to go for a more kind of prog pop rock style, something to be more appealing to mass radio listening audiences, but still try to maintain their heavy prog roots. However, by 1986, Peter Gabriel managed to find a middle ground in making a poppy but still very artsy kind of album, and after four albums that were simply named Peter Gabriel, he was finally forced to give his fifth an actual title, a very simple two-letter title, and that album is simply called So. And judging from the artwork itself, as you can see, is simple, minimalistic, and just all around iconic. This was photographed by a man named Trevor Kay, who many would know for doing the famous bent bell image for Michael Field's Tubular Bells album. In fact, one of the people involved in the sleeve design was Peter Saville, who many would know for doing album artworks for bands such as Joy Division, New Order, Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, and among others. I also think it's very wise they put the title on the back of the album. As Peter himself once said, he felt that titling them would kind of distract away from the actual sleeve itself, which I can see his point of view. I myself am a big fan of textless albums art, and as you could imagine from a lot of his albums, studio albums, live albums, and all that, he loves to not have text on his album covers. And if I were in a band myself, I would prefer not to have them myself. The contrast of black and white, as well as just having the simple yet stern expression of Peter Gabriel, does give a lot of impression. The best way to describe it is less is more. And with that, the analysis of that cool artwork out of the way, let's actually talk about the music itself. Beginning with Red Rain. Beginning with a quiet yet noticeable tapping of a hi-hat by Police drummer himself, Stuart Copeland, intentionally made to resemble the sounds of rain dripping down and whatnot. This one is definitely a good opening to this album. It's dramatic, it's almost dark and brooding, and its lyrics do fit its somewhat ominous atmosphere, singing about, of course, red rain and almost apocalyptic in a way. Apparently the source of inspirations behind this particular track came from a couple of dreams Peter himself had been having for some time, ranging from swimming in a big pool of some red liquid while drinking wine, or witnessing strange large glass bottles in the shape of actual human beings falling off a cliff and smashing down and erupting some kind that same red liquid, soon to be followed by actual rain of that same liquid and all that weird stuff. It is definitely similar to how he got a lot of inspiration for a lot of the imagery and the themes for the Lambs Lies Down album. It is pretty interesting how you can get inspiration for your songs just from having dreams, even if they're very trippy and often. And apparently, when Peter Gabriel began working on the song, he intended to be a theme song for a particular film project he'd been thinking about doing for some time, simply called Mozo. In it, a village of people would have to endure an eternal rain of red blood-like liquid, a punishment for their apparent sins. While this idea for a movie never really got off the ground or gone anywhere, references to this Mozo character and all that kind of scattered across various few songs of his, like Here Comes the Flood, among others. However, many people have speculated that this song is more or less a reference to the crisis of AIDS which was going on at the time, as well as warfare and nuclear fallout, especially the consequences that come from that, such as acid rain and other weird stuff, which are all kind of valid interpretations. Whatever the case, this does seem to come from the point of view of one individual, who I'm going to name Mozo, who kind of notices that there's something going off, being the red rain, but he still kind of tries to deny it, or that there's no problem with it, just go with the flow, like there's no sign of rain, there's no blood, no sign of pain, and so on. But of course, in the end, even he couldn't watch anymore, as he comes to You, Defenses Down, with the trust of a child and no more denial. It is an absolute epic song that I think could have done well as a Genesis song had he and Steve Hackett not left the band Genesis. Speaking of Genesis, the bass here is done by Tony Levin, who not only did a good chunk of the bass for most of the songs of this album, but also worked on the bass for the Pink Floyd album A Momentary Lapse of Reason after Roger Waters departed. But regardless, Red Rain is already one of my personal favourites of Peter Gabriel's solo tracks, and a good demonstration of how dramatic a storyteller Peter Gabriel is capable of being. After the dark, dramatic, and ominous mood of Red Rain, we followed up with a very quiet yet suspenseful Shakuhachi Solo, which is an Asian flute from China and Japan. And you think it's going to lead to somewhere dramatic, but then it kind of takes a 180 into lightheartedness almost, with brass trumpets, and that of course brings us to Sledgehammer, a very funky, almost big band inspired song with lyrics that provoke sexual innuendos and double entendres. But yeah, this song is definitely about, well, sexual intercourse, with the sledgehammer being you know what. But regardless, the music itself is still very light and catchy and all that, and it's no wonder it became such a one of Peter Gabriel's big hits. And in fact, a little fun fact, not only was this his only #1 US hit, it knocked off another only #1 US hit by a particular band, the band he was in himself. Yes, I'm of course talking about Invisible Touch by Genesis, which came around the same time as this, and yes, I'll be getting to that one very, very soon. Speaking of Genesis though, with the horns being played by Wade Jackson of the Memphis Horns, I can't help feel this is a kind of song that Phil Collins himself would do with the Phoenix Horns. In fact, did Gabriel kind of subconsciously do this as a kind of parody of Phil Collins's more soul-inspired songs? Something to think about. But of course, I can't talk about Sledgehammer without even mentioning the very impressive music video. Part of it done, of course, by the creators of Wallace and Gromit, Aardman Animations. And aside from being just a literal description of the lyrics, it is absolutely impressive, just impressive in general. Peter Gabriel apparently had to lie down for 16 hours across the whole process, having all this kind of animation and clay sculptures and all that kind of moving and being animated around him while he was lying down kind of on a glass or like behind a glass. And I can imagine it must have been painstaking to do this for nearly entirely a day. Add on to that, having to lip sync to the song's lyrics. That just kind of blows me away, and I don't think I would ever reach something of that magnitude. After the loud and wild funkiness of Sledgehammer, we then come back down with the next track of the album, Don't Give Up. This one's more of a collaboration effort between Peter Gabriel and Kate Bush, who had been a guest appearance in certain Gabriel songs in the past, in particular No Self-Control and Games Without Frontiers. This song was apparently inspired by the various photographs of the Depression era, such as those shot by Dorothy Lange, and of all the wrinkly homeless people and all those dust bowls. And Pierre felt that it was actually kind of relevant back in the mid to late 80s, what with the Thatcher era and the trade unions being done and dusted and lots of people being laid off and being made redundant. I guess he sensed a kind of parallel now and just went ahead and wrote this song. And apparently he intended to have Dolly Parton, a famous American country singer, to do the chorus bits, but presumably because she was busy with other projects, she had to decline. So Pete had to go with an old friend, Miss Kate Bush. Regardless, I think still it's a good choice though. I haven't heard much of Dolly's work, so I can't really compare or consider. But I still think Kate Bush is still a fantastic choice. Gabriel sings from the point of view of someone who feels run down, struck, and kind of worn down by authority and poverty and fears of failing. And Kate comes in as this voice of hope, this voice of reason, encouraging him to keep pressing on and to, well, don't give up. In fact, Phil Collins himself would tackle such similar issues with the songs Man in the Corner and Another Day in Paradise, those of which I'll be getting into sometime down the road. After that, we liven things up again with the next track, That Voice Again, a very dramatic art pop rock kind of song with lyrics that seem to invoke the consciousness and insecurities and uncertainties. This song was co-written by guitarist David Rhodes from a band called Random Hold, who also done quite a bit of guitar work for a lot of Peter Gabriel's work. In some ways, this song can be seen as inspired, partially influenced and inspired by Peter Gabriel's own upbringing and growing up by his family and whatnot. To us, the voices in our heads can be seen as the kind of authorities and just kind of the dark impulses, but they can also be seen as well, like with Don't Give Up, the voice of reason. They try to tell us to to not do the wrong things, do the right things, and we always try to. Sometimes we try to ignore it, but we know that deep in our hearts we know that some things kind of breach our sense of morality and ethics. And when Peter in particular sings the kind of middle eight phrase of only love can make love, when he belts it out, ooh, it definitely does hit right here, you know. Not just in the pancreas, just right in the soul, the feels. Musically though, this is another catchy and very beautiful, good example of a classic 80s rock pop song, and I kind of wish this was a single off the album with its own music video. And I think because that is definitely an underrated track from Peter Gabriel, and considering how much obscure tracks he's made across his solo discography, that might say a lot. We then begin the second side with In Your Eyes, another popular song by Peter Gabriel. Some of you might already know this from the film Say Anything, where when John Cusack picks up a stereo and kind of blares out the song to his love interest in the house at the window. And even if you don't know it from that, even if you want to introduce a song from that movie, it's still a good song regardless. It's almost gospel inspired in a way, and a lot of its lyrics it's kind of ambiguous. You could see it as, say, a simple love song between Peter Gabriel and a certain source of romantic interest, or it's about love between a person and God. And I kind of like that kind of ambiguity. Lyrically, a lot of references of Doorway to 1,000 Churches and I See the Light in the Heat, among others, seem to kind of lean to that aspect about relationship between man and God, and and I think part of that is also kind of influenced by its African, almost semi-gospel sound, like I mentioned. This is another one where Peter Gabriel kind of tackles his kind of world beat classic kind of sound, and I do like it when a lot of when the artists do expand and give a very diverse sound of music. They don't strict themselves to just one style or one genre. Then people like him aren't exactly afraid to step out of their comfort zones and tackle something different and new. I also gotta give props to Yusu Endu, whose name I'm probably butchering. I apologize if he ever watches this video. For when he did the guest vocal at the ending bit of this In Your Eyes track, and he does do well in adding that little extra flavor to the African-inspired vocals, and it always feels and just kind of it still kind of emphasizes that spiritual nature. And a little side note, Pierre Gabriel was very persistent and determined when it came to how the tracks were ordered along this album. In fact, apparently he tried listening to the beginnings and ends of each finished song to see which ones would connect together well, which is a kind of interesting approach. That said, he wanted In Your Eyes to be the last track of the album, and I could see why. It does definitely give that kind of happy ending, triumphant kind of feeling to it. Like you've been through so much, and now you feel you've finally reached the light at the end of the tunnel. reached your goal and you've reached happiness really. But apparently, some executive suggested they kind of shift it earlier in the album, especially for the vinyl, so the prominent bass line could be emphasized, as where apparently the vinyl disc would vibrate more. But apparently in later CD releases this problem was kind of avoided and they were able to do the actual order that Peter intended. So there you go. Plus the song was apparently partially influenced by actress Rosanna Arquette, who happened to have a bit of a fling with Peter Gabriel at the time, and she also happened to have dated Toto keyboardist Steve Polvero. I probably butchered his name wrong. Who also did a song inspired by her called Rosanna, which is another classic 80s love song which I'm sure many of us know and love. Next is Mercy Street. A more darker, more emotional song. It combines the slow melancholiness of Don't Give Up with the eerie, ominous nature of Red Rain. This was apparently inspired by the works of American poet Anne Sexton, and in fact this was named from a poem and play that she wrote herself. Musically and lyrically, it does paint the picture of this lonely woman, be it an old or a young one, hard to say, living in this life of solitude, fear, and uncertainty, and wondering where could they go from there and here, and well, looking for mercy, looking for some hope and happiness, like with Don't Give Up. And in terms of music, it does help capture that almost fearsome yet still very tragedy of such a track. And apparently, a lot of the percussion bit was actually slower than originally recorded by accident, really. But they kind of liked the sound it made, so they kind of went with that. And Gabriel himself has two vocals in this from Gabriel. He has his main high one and a kind of low, almost bassy one, kind of shadowy kind of take, which does help emphasize the haunting and ominous aspect of the song. By the end of the track, Peter Gabriel kind of flat out mentions Anne by name in the final lines of Anne and her father riding out the waters, riding out the waves on the sea, kind of ending on a kind of ambiguous note, like what they did with Don't Give Up. And I do like ambiguous songs like those. Mercy Street is dark, sensual, sensitive, and is all around a beautifully composed harmony of a track. It's what I would call harmonic rock, if that's a fitting word to describe it. Once Mercy Street settles out and fades away, we then suddenly meet an abrupt and sudden voice simply calling, "Hi there!" And it soon breaks and explodes into the funky dance rock track called Big Time. This is another kind of more catchier song of Peter's, much like Sledgehammer. Tony Levins alongside Jerry Marotta kind of come in to do that kind of plucky, funky, familiar, distinct kind of bass sound, and Stuart Copeland returns to do the drums here. Though honestly, I can still kind of see someone like Mike Rutherford and Phil Collins doing the bass and drums respectively. At least that's how I see and hear things. Also, speaking of Genesis, there also seems to be a bit of a Hammond organ playing a bit across the track, which is something worth noting. Peter Gabriel, even after leaving Genesis, still utilizes the Hammond organ, which is an instrument that's probably used in a lot of progressive rock bands and songs, and yet around the same time, the band Genesis never seems to use the Hammond organ anymore. Not even the Mellotron. What the hell, guys? What the hell? Its lyrics seem to kind of be a commentary on the yuppie culture and the materialism, consumerism, and all-around narcissism of some people of the 1980s. And it also seems to be taking the mickey out of all that, and a bit of a self-aware, satirical kind of take from Peter himself, as if he's kind of worried that the famous celebrity might get into his head, so he kind of gets this song out there and its lyrics, and in the lyrics it kind of sings from the point of view of someone growing up in a small town and wanting to go to a city and be with the big boys and whatnot. And to further out the irony, there don't seem to be a lot of polysyllables in the song. What with the lyrics of "I come from a small town," they think so small, they use small words, and for a song that talks about being so great and big and all out there and yada yada, the lyrics are very dependent on monosyllables. So yeah, kind of brings in the if that's not ironic, I don't know what is. And of course, the song climaxes in the classic line of "the bulge in my big. Well, he doesn't actually say in the song itself, but I think it's best left to our imagination. Much like Sledgehammer, though, Big Time 2 also has a very impressive music video that utilizes a lot of stop motion, specifically strata cut animation, which basically means like having a loaf of clay and whatnot, and just carefully slicing each at a time, and having the inside of it kind of simulate the illusion of animation and movement. It's kind of hard to describe, but if you actually looked up the Big Time music video itself, you'd probably know what I mean. And then we come to "We Do What We're Told," aka Milgram's 37. As you can imagine from the title, this song was very inspired by the experiments done by Stanley Milgram, specifically the obedience to authority experiment, where he kind of experimented on how people would obey their masters, especially dictators in particular. And you can definitely feel that kind of dystopian feel in the song, both lyrically, what few lyrics there are, and musically. But in terms of lyrics, there aren't really very much. It's very minimalist. It simply has a recurring phrase of, well, "we do what we're told," as well as Peter Gabriel saying, "one war, one truth, one doubt, one voice, one dream," and that's all the lyrics. But like I said, less is more, and you can get a lot out of very little lyrics, very few words spoken or sung. And I think what Pierre means by one war and one voice and all that is people being commanded by one figure, one singular authority, like a Big Brother-esque figure, if you will. And the music helps emphasize that feel. It feels very reminiscent of Pierre's more experimental, more obscure and avant-garde music of his earlier albums. In particular, his Melt album, which apparently this one was actually originally written and recorded before, apparently. It has a very, very, very eerie kind of almost drowned drum beat that almost sounds like a heartbeat, a bit like Teardrop by Massive Attack, combined with the suspenseful synth and the sudden heart-striking guitars, and you have a wonderfully dark song to go out on. However, while we do what we're told may be the last song of the album on LP, CD releases actually had a bonus song, which is called Excellent Birds, aka This Is the Picture. This is another avant-garde song, though this one is also a collaboration with Laurie Anderson, who many of you would know for the Oh Superman song, which is another classic, weird, abstract song from the 80s, which, if you haven't listened to, I kind of recommend that. This one kind of feels a bit more, slightly more commercial, but still weird nonetheless. It has a kind of very flute-like synth, which definitely sticks into your head for some time, well after listening to it. Lyrically, it's kind of like a stream of consciousness kind of feel. Maybe a bit of a commentary of how lazy some people are while watching TV, kind of like Genesis's Turn It On Again. Especially how they compare it to Window, seeing pictures of people and, well, excellent birds and falling snow, excellent snow, and so on. Combining the hypnotic and trance-inducing vocals and melody, as well as the rhythm guitar by Nile Rodgers of Chic of all people, and you've got a near perfect avant-garde rock track. The only way I think this could be any more perfect, if of course it had Phil Collins on drums, of course. I keep talking about Phil Collins on a Peter Gabriel album. I don't know why though. Well, anyways, Peter Gabriel's So is a fantastic 80s album and is a good demonstration of diverse music. It has great variations of mood, tones, ideas, and all around catchy melodies. It's both beautiful and funky. It is elegant but also surreal. If you're a big fan of Genesis or you're a fan of world music overall, and if you'd like to hear any solo stuff from any of the members, I say give this one a whirl in case you haven't. Next time we get a little bit more foxy as we take a look at a more obscure album by Elton John.